being able to score the winning goal, there is no better feeling. I don't care. As a defender, they say you love clean sheets, etc. Scoring goals is the best.
Chris, it is such a pleasure to make this happen. We've been so looking forward to this one. So first, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you for the invite. No, I've been looking forward to it.
Now, I'm going to hand over to Charlie for the first question. Fuck it, you can ask it, Charlie. You're far more interesting than me.
That's just an example also of the editing that can go on this. Look, I think before we dive in properly, it'd be really good to just get a bit of the background on what you're up to at the moment, and I guess the mix of business and football.
Obviously, at the minute, I found myself in Italy and Rome, but I started playing football from a bit of a different route in terms of the majority. I didn't go through the whole scholarship route. I was sort of a late bloomer, shall we say. I guess we'll touch on that. But in terms of now, it's led me to Manchester and now to Rome. And then also, especially the last probably 3 or 4 years, I've been able to combine sort of my business interests that I've always sort of had a passion for with also passionate projects as well, and being able to combine those both, which has almost, led me down that path, and something that I'm definitely going to be a part of sort of long beyond football. So it's an exciting path that I'm able to navigate with football.
What do you mean you're a bloomer?
Yeah.
A late bloomer. So I guess when you hear about footballers, they've sort of been training with these academies since they were like 7 or 8, which I did start when I was 8. I was at Millwall until I was about 14. But then I was missing a lot of trainings. I grew up with my mum because my dad passed away when I was younger, and we couldn't really travel to all of the training sessions, etc. And basically I was just falling behind. So I sort of dropped out of the whole academy route and then played for my local team. And then I was sort of playing for my county. And then normally at between 16 and 18, as you probably know, you go for the scholarships and etc. But I wasn't anywhere near that. I was in school, I was doing my A-levels. And then I was literally planning to go to university. I'd already been accepted to do financial economics at university. But when I was probably about 18, I was just finished my exams, and I was probably about 3 weeks, maybe about 4 or 5 weeks from starting university. I was actually 3 weeks away from going away with my lads to Zante, because we were all dispersing from going to different universities and one big blowout before we all go everywhere. But then I had 2 trials, one at Fulham and one at Middlesbrough, because at the time I was playing for England schoolboys, which is almost, it's for everybody who's not in the professional setup but is doing full education. So it's almost the next best prior to the academy. So in my mind, I had these 2 trials and I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. And I think the fact that I already had my A-levels and in my mind, I was going to university, I think I performed better at these trials. And in the end, I got 2 offers, literally 3 weeks out from starting university. So normally most people, by the time it gets to 18, is far too late to be joining these professional clubs. But luckily, I already had, my man plan A was going to university, to be honest. But obviously, I had this opportunity, and it's just sort of not your traditional route.
I love that. Can I ask you, when it came to that decision-making process, was it incredibly obvious to you? Because you have your mindset on university, you kind of tell yourself you're going. Did you always know that that was a very easy decision in terms of choosing football?
It was when it was put in front of me, but I think prior, I didn't necessarily put all my eggs in one basket, even though inside of me, I'd love to be a footballer and to do that journey. But I think the beauty was, because I was already set in my mind, even when I was going to go to university, I was going to carry on playing football, because at this time I was playing non-league for Maidstone. So I was playing with these other really big guys. I was getting beaten up in the non-league. I was like skinny 18-year-old. But I think the fact that, and that's why I advocate for other people to be able to have a plan, not say a plan B, but to have options. And luckily I had the options. And ultimately, I think because I had the options, it made it easier for me to perform in these trials, and then also to have a choice.
When you went into that kind of then professional football environment, was that quite different? Was it strange integrating yourself into people that had been in and around that kind of academy structure for their entire life, and you were coming in with quite a separate background?
Yeah, it was. I must say, the first 3 or 4 weeks, I was KO literally from the training. I was used to playing non-league, so literally up until 18, I'd play a match on a Tuesday we'd probably train on a Thursday and then I'd play a match on a Saturday. So I was only playing 2 games in a training session and then going bang into training every day. I was finishing training, going home totally shattered, thinking, what have I done? Like, I'm not ready for this, because it was just a lot. But luckily, I first went into the Fulham reserve team, and the people and the staff around them, who I still speak to this day whenever we play Fulham, because a lot of the staff are still there in terms of the player liaison and some of the reserve coaches. They made it really easy to settle in, because literally I was walking into an unknown environment.
We were joking before about my athletic prowess. I'm just fascinated. When you said about your training schedules there and the difference from non-league to professional, what does a professional training schedule look like today? What does that look like for you and for the Roma team?
Obviously, at the minute we're in pre-season, so this is probably more hectic, should we say, more busy than normal. Like, for example, we're doing this recording in between me doing double sessions, and obviously with the heat in Rome, we train in the mornings at 10 out on the pitch, but we're in by about 7:30, having breakfast, doing the gym, etc. Then we'll go outside from 10 for a couple of hours, have lunch, finish with some cool down in the gym, and then we'll have a few hours until we go again at 5, literally till about 7, ice baths, gyms. So at the minute, I probably leave my house at about 8 o'clock, and I probably get back about 8:30, 8:45. That's within pre-season. That's for probably about 5 or 6 weeks. And then normally once the season starts, it starts to cool down. So I'll leave around 8ish, and then I can often be back by 3. So it's not all day, but yeah, pre-season can tend to be a little bit more hectic.
Is that kind of the same everywhere, or has it changed when you've kind of moved?
No, it's pretty similar. Even when I was playing in England or in Italy, obviously I'm with the same coach that I was with in Manchester as well now, which obviously makes it easier to settle in. And he weirdly followed me here. But I think, yeah, it's pretty similar. In pre-season, it's quite similar like that.
I'm just going to dive in with like a great one that I'm fascinated by. You've worked with him now at 2 clubs. What have been some of your biggest lessons from working with him?
That he's not changed. I think that's, I think even from the outset, people who know Jose, he is someone who is self-belief in himself. He's also a clear communicator, I think, in terms of, you know exactly what he's thinking, and he will tell you his honesty, which I think is what you need, because sometimes managers can skirt around different things. And that's the beauty where I've ended up working with a few managers now, where even I can see things, plushes on some managers, things that would be different. And I think, yeah, it's a blessing to be able to work with someone who is also a born winner and really nicks those fine details, because they're what make the difference.
Does he encourage, and maybe not just him, but also any other coaches or staff members within football clubs that you've worked with, do they encourage you to have interests and activities outside of football that you get involved in?
Look, obviously, I think all of us know that football at the minute is our bread and butter, shall we say, but I think I don't have too many conversations, to be honest, with Jose or probably some of my previous managers in terms of things outside of football. Football Beyond Borders, for example, is something that is a charity based in London. And I did have a lot of the staff at the time, and like Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, some of the other players coming to some of the events and things. So there is an element of obviously opening up and being inclusive for that. But in terms of having general discussions in terms of outside of football, I think they tend to leave you to it, providing it's not affecting you on the pitch.
We just got an introduction today to Football Beyond Borders because they've just done a big thing with Saka, haven't they?
Yeah, no, they're a great organisation. I remember meeting them quite early days at their Brixton base, and I got introduced to Jasper, who's one of the founders down there, and seeing the work. They were only based out of that little office then. And then I went around some of the schools where they had some of the programs, and I was speaking to some of the teachers who'd interacted with some of these kids who, I guess, to them were perceived the troublemakers, and Football Beyond Borders staff would be able to relate to them and almost take them on a program, and seeing the results and the pure shock in the teachers at how they've changed. And then since then, I've worked with Jasper and we've took it up to Manchester and sort of really global in terms of, but some of the results are mind blowing. But I think it's because the staff of Football Beyond Borders are able to relate to the children and almost give them that attention that they need, because in schools it's very difficult when you have one teacher and you've got 30 kids, and then ultimately everyone needs more attention, and Football Beyond Board is able to give that.
Can I ask you, Chris? We spoke about the business interest there, and having a chat with Jose. I doubt you're swapping angel deals with him. But my question to you is, you got Josh Butler, you got Ben Stokes, you got Serge, you got all these amazing people. How did the Players Fund come to be, and what's the origin story there? And can you provide a little bit of background on that? Actually, given we actually haven't touched on that, we dive straight in.
Yeah. So I think the Players Fund was almost an evolution from my previous venture with ForGood, in terms of creating a network of, I guess, like-minded people. Obviously, the Players Fund is more athlete-based, but in ForGood, what I created previously is, some of our roster is from TV, music, sport, and almost grouping together like-minded people to have sort of a thesis around impact and sustainability. And then I'd always had a passion and a drive to be involved in a fund, because ultimately I enjoy doing angel deals, because I get to speak to the founders, I get to get stuck in from early doors, I get to help them grow and help where I can in the few things that I can help. Sort of from that, I got linked to Fergus and Rory, and then we just sort of had a conversation from there, and we had mutual connections, and then from there we've just sort of really started to explode, combine networks, and hopefully create a space that's really inviting for all athletes.
But how did, with those different athletes, were they just quite organic conversations, or was there a criteria that you were looking for, people from specific areas or interests that you knew they had, or people in your network knew they had? How did that kind of selection come about?
We already had, I guess, a staple, especially within ForGood. For example, Hector Bellerin, he is a member of ForGood, who's also obviously a part of the Players Fund, but he was brought into the Players Fund by a different connection. So in terms of, we were able to bounce off different connections quite well. We also targeted some people in terms of where we'd heard about their interest in certain deals that they might have been involved in, or even people just reaching out. I also started ForGood because I did have a passion where I wanted to ultimately invest a large bulk of my money in impactful and sustainable things. But ultimately, I was also getting a lot of questions prior to that in terms of, I heard you invested in this deal, how's it going? And then I obviously, in terms of having those conversations, I realized, for example, Hector was involved in so many deals that I didn't know that he was. And then equally some other people who were asking a question in terms of just wanting to learn that journey. So I've been able to almost give them a platform where they can see some of my case studies and be linked with seasoned professionals. And ultimately, the Players Fund is one where education is also hugely important, because we've got a couple of partnerships with Sitch to Play and be able to almost educate and empower athletes sort of in the venture space.
Can I ask you, how was the fundraise process? Fundraising is quite an opaque process, a lot like Bluntly the Business of Sport, why we did the show. But how was the fundraise process for the 40 million?
I'm not sure whether we hit the 40 million yet. There is a number. I think we're maybe halfway. But I think in terms of, especially for athletes, we have a policy, especially for athletes, that there is no charge on athlete money in terms of management fees, which is obviously, hopefully, another enticeful thing, but also there's no minimums. So I think we ultimately wanted to give a platform where people can come in from different levels. It depends whether they play in the Premier League or whether they play in different sports, that depends on however their financial situation is, they can be a part of it and ultimately have a voice and ultimately have an influence on the decisions. And one of the things, especially with the Players Fund, is we've created like an athlete committee where you can have a voice and ultimately be a part of the growing of the fund as well.
Chris, who would you most like to have as an investor in the fund who you don't have yet?
Lewis Hamilton, I think. Obviously, he is plant-based as well, which I am, so that's a slight draw. But equally, I also know he's very active in the space. We are having discussions with his team, but we've not got him over the line yet. So maybe this can give him a little nudge. But yeah, he's someone who it would be great to have a part of it.
The joys of calling people out in this is it makes it incredibly awkward for them to say no afterwards.
Exactly.
I actually interviewed the Prime Minister and I said that I wanted to date a Peloton instructor. Sadly, she never DM'd me back. But I thought I'd give it a go. I absolutely love that. Can I ask you, okay, so we have the fund. Where do you think founders most want your help? Is there a commonality in we want you to post on Twitter, we want your coaching? What do they want from you, do you think?
I guess that there is an element of that athlete engagement in terms of socially and to be able to have a voice, which I think each to their own in terms of the athletes. I think the people that come on board, they don't have to be posting all the time. And equally, I don't want people to have that pressure, but that's where I feel like you have an open option to be able to do that. But also, obviously, this thesis, especially on one of them, is around future of sports and human performance. It's almost products that potentially we could use on a day-to-day basis and obviously give feedback on terms of that and being able to influence in different areas. But I think ultimately being an open book in terms of how much they really want to be involved.
Do you feel there are like particular areas personally that you contribute more that have developed through your exposure to professional sports and I guess the dedication and application that you needed to demonstrate while going through that environment?
For example, Peanutexes, which was one of my first investments and really where it all started. I sort of had this urge to want to be a part of startups from even a young age. I was watching a lot of Dragon's Den, for example, and now I'm obviously in a fortunate position where I can pick and choose what I do now and also after football. And I've always had that urge, that business startup urge. And then now I'm able to combine that with my own passions of what I think and what I want to live by and ultimately combine those. And for example, Peanutex was one of the first ones, and All Plants. And at first I just saw those products because I think I was in a shop in Hugo Boss and I bought a pair of trainers and the material was made out of Peanutex. And All Plants, I think I'd sampled it and tried it. I had no way of actually reaching out to them. So I literally just went cold. I found Peanutex's Twitter and All Plants Twitter. I just sent them a message, just said, love your product, etc. It'd be great to chat. Also sent, I think, Bruno from Peanutex an email. I just thought, let's just try and reach out. I was totally new. And then eventually, probably like a couple of weeks later, I went down to London, met them both. And then after some months later, they were my first investments. That's really where I guess I got my appetite and real eager to do more. And then obviously linking Peanutex with Nike as well. And we did a collaboration not too long ago as well. So obviously I can only help so far on those, but where I can, I've really helped.
Chris, how big were those checks for those first investments?
So those first checks for Peanutex, I think it was about 150 and All Plants was 100.
Gosh, were you nervous writing those checks?
I was, especially when I was obviously doing the due diligence, etc. Obviously, all investments can be risky, etc. And ultimately, I had my own financial team, and I was also speaking to other people who've been in the space, and no one can say, oh, this is a sure thing. So there's always an element of a gamble. But ultimately, there was an element of, I'm just going to give you this money and then we'll speak and I'll see where I can help. But ultimately, who knows where this is going to go? And obviously, they're all a long play. They're not like next year you're going to necessarily sell and have a 10x. But ultimately, I felt that they were companies that I could be aligned with for the long term. And that made parting with that money easier because I felt like they were also following by my own standards and I wanted to help. So I think that helps to have the same cause.
So the ambition for you is very much as an interest and a passion for this rather than just putting capital somewhere that, can gain value over time and a good place to keep your money.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously I do have a portion of my funds that has the staple of the S&P, etc., and things that are done. But ultimately, I think more and more allocation of my own personal wealth is going into venture and almost, I feel like I want to be able to be a part of something that is far greater and can also have an impact. And I can enjoy doing it at the same time, which is just a win-win.
Chris, can I ask you, do you think that we need to do more to educate, and I mean this nicely, but to educate kind of the young footballing class. You start so young that you don't have the financial education that a lot of people have through universities and through jobs in the traditional finance world. Do you think we need to do more to educate young sportsmen and women? And do you think everyone should be an investor in the Players Fund as like an entry point into learning investing?
Yeah, I think going to your first question, I do think more does need to be done. And I think, especially for example, like me, when I was coming up for United, obviously I was in the Fulham change room at the start. So there was a lot of older, experienced players, Jimmy Bullard, Bobby Zamoras. And then obviously when I was going to United, there's Rio, Vidic. I mean, people that I'd watched on TV and pretended to be them in my living room with my brother, scoring goals against the curtains with little balls, etc. And then to be in that environment. But I think I obviously wasn't, so we say, too pally when I first came into the changing room because I'm a 19, 20-year-old. But I'd hear them speaking about different business deals. And a lot of them were property, for example. That was the sort of the thing then. Not long after, I'd read in the newspapers about all these property deals that went wrong and they'd lost money and they didn't trust all these people. And then I think from then, I'll be honest, not even up until recently, players rarely speak about investments because ultimately I think we've all heard the horror stories. And then ultimately there's a level of you can't trust and you don't know who's got the right team, who's got the right financial advisor. And ultimately I think it's just been a taboo subject. And I think that's where it needs to be changed.
Can you help me out here? What do most people have, athletes? Say you're an athlete in a top team, you have an agent and a financial advisor. What's the structure that's helping make your financial decisions for most athletes today?
Each of us have an agent. I say a lot of us would have a financial advisor, which sometimes they are linked with the agent, which is also can be a problem. And I've also had, should we say, history where I've also changed agent previously, especially when I was younger and I had a financial advisor that was linked with the agent. There was a few dodgy things going on there. And ultimately, I didn't lose necessarily lots of money in that, but I heard a lot of stories about that. And ultimately from then, that made me dive further into ultimately, okay, I've got my agent. Now I need to do an interview process on 3 separate financial advisors. In football, there's such a link between agents, financial advisors, different services that ultimately they're all in the same circle. And I think from that, and I think now you're seeing players ultimately take ownership and ultimately, I did an interview process sort of soon after for 3 accountants, financial advisors, and ultimately picked accordingly and ultimately separated that from the norm.
I'm sorry, I'm naive here. What are the problems of having linked financial advisors and agents?
For example, I got introduced to a previous agent from a more senior player at Fulham, and ultimately there was a link with a financial advisor, which sometimes they can promote things that are more inclined with their own agendas. For example, they get bigger kickbacks, or they're not really seeing the bigger picture in terms of they got this opportunity. They're not looking at 10 other opportunities. They're ultimately looking at their own agenda. And then ultimately, if they bring in, we're bringing this agent, or for example, you've got someone doing your car insurance or house insurance, etc., they'll get kickbacks from that agent because they've introduced that person. And ultimately, one, you can't trust people like that anyway. And luckily, I learned younger, even though I didn't lose out of pocket, but I heard from other people's horror stories. And from then, that's made me, I think, even more wary and almost learn the dark place of football, where ultimately there are young people earning lots of money in a short space of time. And there are a lot of vultures out there who if you've not got the right team behind you, can easily be swept away.
It's funny, when I brought in one of our previous guests who's a very famous athlete into a deal that I was doing, and he said, "But what's your take?" I said, I don't know what you mean. And he's like, how much are you making off it? I said, I don't make anything off it, dude. I'm $1 million in the red on this one. I'm putting $1 million of my own money in. And he was like, wow, this is very strange. Can I ask, sorry, I didn't mean to dominate. I'm just interested. When you said about kind of young players who earn a lot of money, was there a big jump in earnings for you when you go to Fulham and suddenly you're in the first team? When was that big jump in earnings for you? And was that difficult for your mind to get your head around? Because suddenly it is quite a big change.
Yeah, there was. there was a really, really big jump. Like, for example, when I obviously was going to uni and then I got offered this Fulham and Middlesbrough contract, which I took for Fulham. I mean, I would have played for free for a little bit. Do you know what I mean? So the money then was, I think it was about £750, and then I think the next year was 1,200, or give or take, it was around those type of figures. So the first year I did reserve team, and then I was traveling with the first team. Like, you have a squad of 18 at that time, and then I was always the 19th person. So I was traveling where you learn, and after 6 months, like, oh, this is great traveling to the first team. But then obviously I was being that spare man every time. But obviously I was learning. Made my debut at the end of that season. And then luckily my break came, because that year we had Roy Hodgson as manager. But we pretty much played the same 13 players. They were always fit. Angland and Hughes were the centre-backs all the time, and they were fit. And the team did really well. They qualified for Europa League. So the next year, I knew we'd have Europa League. And that's when I got my chance, because we were playing Thursdays and Sundays. And that was almost my break, shall we say. And then halfway through that season, it got to around Christmas, I think the January transfer window. And I was being linked with Arsenal heavily. And I'm an Arsenal fan growing up. So I knew that they wanted me. And in my heart, I was thinking only of Arsenal. And then at the last minute, not long before I was probably going to sign for them, I was getting off the coach. I think we were playing Blackburn Rovers away. Roy Hodgson pulls me to the side. He said, Man United have made a bid for you, and Sir Alex Ferguson's going to come to the hotel in 45 minutes to speak to you. And I was like, what? Like, normally you see all these protracted conversations in the media, like all these clubs being linked, but that was just literally out of the blue. And I was just like, didn't know what to do. So I literally got back into my room, rang my mum.
I was about to say, call your mum.
I was like, literally went straight to my room, ringing my mum, and she was just like, wow, it's amazing. And then, so literally I was just looking at the time, it's like half an hour till he comes, sat in my room, just like, what are we going to talk about? Like, what? How am I not going to make this awkward? I've always just seen him on TV and stuff. So, but I mean, obviously, whether you know him or not, he is that granddad figure, shall we say, that he's just so easy to talk to. And I think we just chatted for more than an hour. So then it went to the decision of, where do I go, literally? And then in my mind, I was thinking maybe I go to Arsenal. One, I supported them, but also I thought there was an easier route. Because at the time, United had Rio Ferdinand, Manja Vidic, Wes Brown, Johnny Evans. I was like, where am I going to play? But he said, you will play. And he had that strong conviction that you will get your chance and you will play. And then ultimately I did sign. And in my first year, I played, I think, 35 games, which was brilliant. But I stayed on loan at Fulham for the rest of that season. And then that summer, I obviously kicked into my United contract. So, for example, prior to that, when I thought I was going to Arsenal, speaking with my agent about some of the numbers, and I mean, they were, obviously I was earning £1,000. I mean, we're talking 20x, a lot more. And then ultimately, when United came in, that level went up another notch. So I'd literally gone from earning that to potentially earning that, depending on where I choose. And to happen in such a short amount of time was pretty crazy.
What actually what goes into your thought process when you are having to make those moves? Because you've got one there, which is Arsenal, which obviously has a close place in your heart.
Yeah.
Then you've got, mind you, Arsene Wenger's not bad, but you've got Alex Ferguson now as well. You've got, I'd imagine, a location thing, which, is London or Manchester. And obviously you've done, maybe touch on it a little bit, you've done Manchester and then into Rome as well. How do you, is there a prioritization process? Is it literally, Mum, what do you think? How do you come to that conclusion?
Especially with that initial move. In terms of location, it wasn't so much of a biggie in that me and my family, we grew up in Kent. So I was actually living between our training ground in Kent. I was sort of in Kingswood, which is in the middle, which is just off the M25, so that I could easily go back home on the days and I could easily go to training ground. So I'd already used to living on my own. That was the first time I had my own apartment, etc., whilst I was at Fulham. I remember with Arsenal, in my mind, I was pretty set that I was going there. And then one day, I think we were playing Tottenham away, And Sir Alex Ferguson and David Gill at the time came to my game, and my manager, Roy Hodgson at the time, was like, "You're going to go back up to Manchester after this game to, I don't know, basically do the deal." By the time, my head was so frazzled, I was like, "But I think I want to go Arsenal," and I'd been speaking to them for so long. And then literally after that game, I didn't go to Manchester. And then the next day I went in for recovery, and I had my sort of goalkeeper coach at the time and Roy Hodgson going, "What are you doing? You're saying no to Sir Alex Ferguson. You're doing all this." And they were going crazy at me because they were like, "What are you doing? Who turns down Man United?" But at the time I was like, I've been in such long conversations with Arsenal that, and then obviously I want to play. I want the best route to play. I don't know if I can get that. And obviously all of it's so new, and I've got all these outside pressures of, obviously, I'm sure Roy Hodgson, etc., had good relationship with Sir Alex, and same with Arsene Wenger. Obviously, yeah, it was a crazy little time then. And then obviously United went perfectly, but at the time location wasn't necessarily a thing. And then, for example, when I moved from Manchester to Rome, obviously I had a family then as well, which that also happened within 48 hours of the window because I wasn't planning on going anywhere. But then it became clear that I was maybe only going to play half the games, and that's not for me. I'm not interested in just hanging about and sitting on the bench and playing half the games. I want to play them all. So literally within the space of 48 hours, that changed. And I mean, I'd had my son born in May, so this is now August. So not only I had a newborn, and obviously I'm asking my wife and then my son, I've got my dog, to go somewhere on loan into Rome, which my wife, I mean, she's always backed me, and she was like, "Look, if you need to do this, we'll do this. We're always with you," etc. So that made that easy. And then ultimately, yeah, going on loan was great. And then it also gave me options after. And then ultimately I decided to, obviously, I'm still here.
There's so many questions I have. Can I ask, how do players feel when they're linked with clubs? It's like, oh, am I? Like, the world is telling me that I might be going somewhere. Do you know? Is it sometimes a shock that the Daily Mail is suggesting that you're going to, I don't know, wherever the club that they're suggesting is? How do players feel?
75% of the time you already know.
Yeah.
But sometimes there can be some other ones that come out, and I guess the odd time I've probably asked my agent, I think when I was younger, is this true? So there is an element of knowing some and not knowing some, and then some journalists just making up a story because it makes good headlines or something. At the same time, there's been a couple of times where I'm like, is this true or whatnot?
Contacts made always though through the agent rather than, well, actually, you probably shouldn't answer anything like this, otherwise it's the old touching up stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
but generally contact through an agent, and then, but I guess through the club, and then hopefully through the agent.
Yeah, I guess that's the ideal scenario, shall we say? And yeah, look, I think within football, it can also be a small place. I think in terms of previously you just spoke to players or at certain clubs, and some things aren't a secret that you're linked with certain places, so you'll have certain conversations with certain people, and I think that's normal. But I think the actual official procedure in terms of when the bid goes in and then you can really get stuck into the nitty gritty of the negotiations, etc., I think that's when obviously they have to go through the club first.
Can I do just want to ask about kind of two really important moments, I think, which is like one, arriving in Manchester, and two, arriving in Rome. I think it actually goes back to like what it takes to be a great founder, changing your like mindset to different situations. If we start on Manchester, you join a team of true freaking heavyweights, as you mentioned there with some of those names. What did they do to make you feel safe and encouraged, but also that you have to perform as well? How was it coming into that dressing room?
It was pretty daunting to start with. I remember going up, I'd already sort of signed and I was still playing at Fulham, but I think I went up to watch the derby and then I got introduced in the changing room. I was sitting upstairs in the box, and then I went down with Sir Alex Ferguson and Sir Bobby Charlton, and they took me down and I was being introduced. Oh, hi Ryan, hi Paul, and all of these names that are just super crazy. So I was just like that little fanboy. I was like, hey, and then went back down to London. And obviously in that summer I joined, and then I guess I was really surprised at how inviting that environment is. There are different environments. I've been quite lucky at the clubs that I've been at and the periods that I've been at, because obviously a lot of footballers have to change clubs nearly every year, so it can be very sort of difficult to settle. But seeing all these people in the highest level of football, they were really inviting in terms of asking questions about me. And it's like, I should be asking questions about you because you're the superstar. And they could tell they was like really sincere in terms of asking me questions and being open. And I think ultimately they led the perfect example in that they didn't really need to say too much. They were just showing that on the pitch, and ultimately off the pitch, how they conducted themselves also made me realize that how they are as a person as well.
Can I ask, what did they show themselves off the pitch and on the pitch about how they are as a person? And what are some lessons? Because there's some truly great leaders there in the Man U team, as you mentioned. You mentioned Paul, you mentioned Ryan, who we heard a lot about.
Yeah.
Bruce. What did you learn from them?
I think on the pitch, in terms of, we have a plan from the manager, like Sir Alex will give us a tactical plan, but we never really worked on tactics too much, because I think he, along with the Ryan Giggs, the Paul Scholes, they want to give you that strong sense of accountability on the pitch. Yes, you have this job to do, but you're also free to be able to play as you are, and ultimately why you've been selected to play at one of the biggest clubs in the world. So I feel like they have that fine balance of, yeah, this is my job, but ultimately you can do it in a certain way. And I feel like that was very rewarding, that they put that trust on you, especially a kid, to be able to go into that environment and just do as you see fit. And I guess another element was they have a very, I guess, a clear and open communication in terms of, the door was always open with Sir Alex. If I wanted to go in and I'm going to say, oh, you shouldn't play Rio this week, you should play me, or we should be pressing like this. Like, I'm sure you can have those conversations, but obviously I was just a kid at that time. But I knew and I saw on the pitch how he'd have those conversations with these players, and even some other younger players who'd been there a little bit longer than me, but weren't too much older. They were also able to have an input. So I feel like that level of trust between us all really helped with the togetherness, because ultimately in a squad, you've got 25 players. Not everyone can play. And ultimately I've been in some squads where it can really kick off because they're really pissed off that they can't play. But ultimately it felt like they would have 25 superstars, but the atmosphere was really good because Sir Alex was very open. And I remember one time, quite early in my first season, I wasn't playing. He said, you're not going to play the next 2 games, but you're going to play the Manchester derby. So I was like, wow, okay. So literally I was doing some extra fitness work with the fitness guy at the time, just working on different drills. And ultimately the derby was my next game. And then ultimately that's the game where Wazza did that overhead kick that was amazing. I had my family in the crowd. That was my first derby. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. But he was so forward thinking in terms of how he managed that group. And I was just really surprised, because even now it's very near impossible to be able to manage 25 players. And that's different lessons that I've learned from managers.
That's incredible that he actually would look that what he would have earmarked games.
I think that's also how he's learned to manage such a great team of players, because ultimately you're so used to 11 players playing all the time, like we are at Roma and like we are at most clubs. But at that time, he would do so many different rotations. Like most weeks, you didn't know what the team was, even from an outside, because he would just chop and change 4 or 5 players this game, 4 or 5 players that game, but have the same sense of trust no matter how big the game was. And I feel like that gave us a real sense of, sort of accountability that I sort of touched on previously.
And do you think that then, you mentioned that really it's building accountability and then really great communication. Is that the kind of stuff now, looking at business, looking at work outside of sport, that you will look for in companies? You want to see that within the groups of people and how they're operating and almost doing what they're doing.
Yeah, 100%. Because I think there was an element of the product being obviously very good, but ultimately I'm investing in the founder. I'm investing in that team. And I think that's ultimately my real essence. And that's where sort of I linked with the All Plants team, the Peanuts Tex team. Ultimately, I'm investing in them and in their vision, and ultimately them being able to have sort of achievable, clear expectations. And I think it can be very similar in terms of, obviously, when you're a founder of a team or a founder of a startup, you have to manage so many different variants that ultimately the leader is the first port of call. And he's crucial in terms of how he is and how he manages his team.
I thought the opposite of that question, Charlie, respectfully. The joy of doing this, Chris, with your bro is you can say the truth. Like, what's he going to say? No, I want a shit communicator who I can't trust. Like, that's like, but like, I think a really common trait is like actually the best founders are aware that uncertain times come and you just have to move with them and move with very different situations. With Rome, this is a really different environment and atmosphere to Manchester. How was moving to Rome with your family another big dimension? And building a home there, was that tough? And how did that play out?
The initial conversation was, it's because normally you hear about all these protracted, like I touched on, with sort of clubs, etc., and they go on for quite a while, quite often. Whereas this, like, I was quite focused. I was playing all pre-season, and I thought that I was going to be moving. And ultimately, I never had a massive drive to move abroad, to be honest. I mean, everyone talks about the Premier League being one of the best, blah, blah, but I never had the real passion to necessarily go abroad because I had it very good in England. But then ultimately circumstances changed, and then to have to make a decision that quickly under pressure as well was...
Can I be blunt? Why did you have to make a decision so quickly?
Because there was only 48 hours left of the transfer window. Obviously, Rome's worked out, which is great, but I only found out at the end. So my options were also very limited because everyone had already bought who they wanted to, took everyone on loan. And then ultimately I get this news that probably going to be third choice or might play half the games. And for me, I've been so used to playing at United. Obviously, after that first year, I played half the games, and ultimately I was very consistent in the team that I wasn't prepared just to sit around and play some of the games. Like, I've got no interest in that. So that's why I had that sort of pressure on me that I could have just stayed. It would have been easier because my son was a few months old, but it almost, I guess it also gave me a new sense of life in that I'm taking a risk, but also I like to live by no regrets as well. That's one of my own mantras in terms of, especially when I go onto the pitch, being able to not live with regrets, and ultimately, yeah, being able to try a new experience. And the fact that I knew my family would follow me and believe in me that made that decision a lot easier.
What was the biggest difference between Manchester and Rome from a football perspective?
I think going into Rome, obviously, I hadn't watched too much of the Italian league, but obviously everyone knows about obviously the big clubs in Italy and the league. But in terms of the football, I don't think there was a huge great difference. There was a lot more tactical work, shall we say. I think a lot of games were very tactical, more than they are in England in terms of non-stop counters. But I think that's also changing in Italy now. It's a lot more goals scored, a lot more counter-attack, and a lot more faster, especially in terms of, obviously, United has a massive fan base, but also here in Rome, they live and breathe football here. Obviously in Manchester, where I sort of, in that hub, there's so many different teams. Whereas in Rome, you've got Lazio, but ultimately, I rarely see any Lazio people, like fans. Like literally, I think they're more in the north. In terms of, if you're probably to work out, I reckon it's probably 80-20 in Rome. I mean, I'm probably going to get some Lazio fans not very happy with that. I feel like that's why you're almost in a bubble in Rome, in that literally everywhere you go, everyone's a Rome fan. And also, like in England, I have a lot of kids watching games or wanting pictures, whereas here I'll get some nan and granddads who are just crazy. They'll show me their tattoos on their arm, and I'm like, it's like a full family thing there. They're all just so passionate. It's so nice to be part of.
Here, I guess you had the different challenge where you, for the first time, were moving somewhere with a different language as well. Did you realize that was kind of a quite important thing that you had to get a hold of relatively quickly?
Yeah.
Or is there enough around to kind of sustain you?
Yeah, so I think after the initial move, that also dawned on me that I'm like, I didn't really like languages in school. I think you're more led by your teachers in school as well, because ultimately you move towards the subjects that you like with your teachers, and both of my French and German teachers I didn't really like, so I didn't necessarily like languages too much. So that was also another challenge, shall we say. But ultimately, because I spoke to Edin Dzeko before coming as well, just to speak to him, and obviously I sat next to him in the change room and he was my main port. But when I first come to Rome, him, Justin Cliver, and Davide Santon were the only ones who spoke English. I mean, the manager did, and the coaching staff, which helps also because they were Portuguese at the time, Paulo Fonseca. But the actual team, there wasn't too many English speaking. So I was having to learn the language quite quickly and ultimately start off with the main things on the pitch. For example, left, right, man on, push up, drop deep, like the main shouts that you do on a pitch, which you can pick up quite quickly. So I was learning quite fast in terms of over those 4 or 5 months. And then COVID hit. So then literally I was in Italy for the whole of COVID as well. And that was another added dimension that was pretty crazy, especially because it started here. And obviously the lockdown was pretty strict here as well. So that added to, I think half of my time here has obviously been under COVID, so which is quite surreal.
Can I ask you, for much of, my childhood growing up, Owen Hargreaves was like the unicorn Brit who played abroad, obviously with Bayern Munich. When you think about, the success that you've had in moving and playing abroad, do you think we should see more Brits move and play abroad in foreign leagues?
I think definitely. And I think you are seeing more now than you have sort of previously. And even as I mentioned before, I never had a real urge to do that. But now having done that, it's almost opened up a new world, because ultimately football is such a small span of our lives that if you're able to experience different things and also have the opportunities to go to other great clubs as well, it's a real eye-opener. And I think everybody who's come, no one's regretted it. And I think that's also quite telling in itself as well.
What do you know now that you wish you'd known before you moved? We have many, many people listen to the shows. For players that are potentially thinking about a move, what do you know now that you wish you'd known before you made the move?
To not necessarily hesitate when I was and ahhing as to whether I was going to come. And ultimately, I never really looked at leaving United because there were very few places to go from there. But even some other clubs, not necessarily just looking within England, to almost open up and be open to more abroad experiences from a younger age. I'm not saying I would have left United earlier, but I think being able to experience that and to try something else, I think is, for me, obviously United is a major part of my career, but also being able to have this experience is going to be able to sit with me and my family for a long, long time. And ultimately, I think it's also opened us up to different cultures as to how and where we live after football. So, for example, we always thought we'd always live in England, and we like to travel further afield in the summers. We've done the Perus, Costa Ricas, Vietnams, Thailand, etc. We like to go further afield. But now, having lived in Italy for quite a substantial period, I don't think we will live in England. We will live in England for part of the year, but we'll also live, now we feel like we will live large parts out of England as well. And I don't think we'd ever have got that without living here, which is really opened us up.
Was it all right for your family? And obviously, you'd say you moved out there and your son was just a few months old, now growing up pretty much, probably more Italian, I suppose, than English. How was that?
I think it was a big ask of my wife, I think, because ultimately it's easier for me because I'm going into an environment where I'm going to work near enough all day, spending probably 3-4 nights of the week away. Easy for me to settle in. Whereas for her, she's been taken away from her friends, her family, obviously her mum, and some of her friends came out for large portions. But I feel like it's harder for her than it is for me. So trying to be as understanding as possible and trying to help her get back to England when she can, and also to help other people to come here. And obviously now my son's 4 and I've just had a new son born in Italy last month. Now I've got 2 boys and he's obviously the first of us to be born abroad. So Italy is going to be a big part of our life, sort of beyond football as well.
Parenting is such a seismic change to one's life. I'm asking this again, but applied specifically to parenting. What do you know now about fatherhood that you wish you could call and tell yourself the night before your wife had your first? I asked 2 hedge fund managers this morning. One said run, it's not too late, and the other said be there for her in every way, cherish and love her. And I thought, wow, that's the real variant.
Yeah,
probably if he wished he had known it, it meant he hasn't done it.
Yeah, exactly. No, I guess I've tried to be there as much as possible in terms of, especially with our newborn now, for example. He was born probably a month ago. Obviously, especially in this period, I'm away pretty much all day. So I guess knowing how hard it is for her, I think, obviously I tried to be there as much as possible, but almost try and really make sure that she has everything and that she's not pushed aside, but you know what I mean? That she has everything that I could do and above and more. But yeah, I think it's it's just a roller coaster, and it's a life changer, isn't it? And it's amazing now to just have that interaction with my son Leo, who's 4 now, and the questions you get asked are just, there's no thoughts in terms of it, just comes out, which is what I love, because it's just fresh. They don't think, they're not blocked by all these other external sources, and it's just so refreshing.
That's what Charlie has with me, Chris. Don't worry. We obviously, with the Players Fund, it's like an incredibly exciting next chapter for you. When you think about the Chris Smalling chapter 2 post football, and I know that's many years away, you're still an incredible member of the Rome team. But when you think about that chapter 2, how do you think about it?
A lot of people are like, oh, what are you going to do after football? Are you going to go into coaching and all of this? And it's like, for me, football is always going to be a passion of mine. And I feel like, for example, I want to have some element within football. And I feel like Football Beyond Borders will be a part of that, because it's almost inspiring the next generation, but also having some football element in terms of it. Like, we're planning a trip for some of them to come to Rome as well. But for me, I went into this sort of venture space for 3-4 years ago. I was dipping my toes in, and obviously I've now invested in more businesses personally. But for me, I'm unfazed by the next chapter. And if anything, I'm also welcoming when that time comes, I think, because obviously within football, we have a lot of free time as well. Like, we're away in hotels a lot, and it gives me a chance to be able to connect with founders, look over decks, have conversations, set up Zoom calls, because ultimately at home, it's very difficult with little ones. But I enjoy doing that, and I feel like I'm enjoying football, and I think that's helping me enjoy football even more, because ultimately I've got 3-4 however many years left, but ultimately when that does pass, I'll have more time to be able to, I've always had a business passion, but I'm able now, and almost in the position where I'm lucky enough that I can choose what I want to do. If I don't want to do something, I don't have to do it after football, and now I can combine some passions of making a difference, and also having that inspiration of my sons as well, to be able to look up to dad and be like, he's doing something good. I'm quite excited for when that chapter does end. I can just spend more time doing that. You never know when the time hits and it's like, my legs won't go anymore, I've got to stop. You'll never know until that moment hits. But for me, I'm quite comfortable in terms of when that transition happens.
I like identify with my job with 20 VC as a fund manager. It's who I am. I've done it since I was 17. Kind of similar to a lot of, you when you became a pro at 18. Do you worry that your identity is Chris Smalling, the footballer, and when you're not that, it's quite challenging?
Especially, like, for example, when I was going to go to uni and I was going to do financial economics, I always said to myself, I'm going to pick that up when I've settled within football. And I didn't. And ultimately, things one for another, football overtakes, and ultimately you end up prioritizing other things. But now that I've obviously opened that chapter of looking into startups, etc. I feel like my identity at the minute is a footballer, but ultimately when I do finish my career, and ultimately many years after that, I want to have a bigger impact outside of football than I have necessarily on the pitch. And that's some of my idols, for example, who have had bigger impacts outside of their existing domain, shall we say. When I do speak to these founders and where I can help, there's only a small niche of what I can help with. But I guess I'd like to break that cycle of just, it's Chris the footballer who's just invested in this company and blah, blah, blah. I feel like I'd like to have I'd like to be more than just a footballer.
I think one of the most important things as an investor is knowing exactly where you can move the needle, being very clear and illustrating that to founders. Hey, when it comes to 1, 2, and 3, I'm world class. Other than that, please go somewhere else because I'm not very good. And most actually investors don't know where they really are kind of spiky or brilliant. And so they offer everything, and no one likes a smorgasbord of kind of average.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that.
So you have a lot of that confidence and you're at ease with that, and you've got other passions and interests. How consistent is that within teammates that you've worked with players that you've been exposed to? Are there others who do fear kind of the end of their career and what they do more? And is there more, I guess, back to the start of our conversation, which was around the education piece and ensuring that we give people maybe a better start and don't require maybe stop school at 16 and continue to 18, that we could be doing? to ensure that that end of career process isn't as potentially scary as it could be?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I guess firstly, in terms of where I'm at, I think I'm probably, should we say, at peace and almost also excited for the next chapter that I'm combining with football now, but then I'm able to one day step more into it. I think very few are able to know what they want to do after. It's a pretty daunting way. The majority of footballers have been doing it from the age of 5, and their parents have took them to their academy when they were probably 4 or 5, like 3-4 times a week, which seems crazy. But I do feel like there is this perception that if you don't go into coaching, if you don't know if you want to be a coach, what do you do? That is a large problem for a lot of footballers and especially athletes in different sports. And I think that goes back to, especially when you're younger, because I think they worked out what the probability of kids becoming professional is like so small. And then ultimately, when you do this scholarship from 16 to 18, which I never did, so I was in full-time school, most of them are just ticking a box. Ultimately, they're mainly going to school for most of the time. And I've spoken to other people when they did the scholarship, they would do, a small course, but they'll do it like 2 afternoons a week. And it's something that is just literally whatever the course is, like sport, PE course or whatever it is. It's not something that is setting them up for another path that they can have side by side with their career or something after. Because ultimately in football, you're so consumed in that now I'm in my 30s, I'm old, all of this. Whereas in life, being in your 30s is far from old. You've got so many years ahead of you. Whereas in football, it's just in this whole little bubble that, oh my God, there's all these 18, 19-year-olds who were born in 2001, 2002, and you're this old guy on the pitch, etc. Like, football is in its own bubble, and it's not for the good as well. And I feel like there needs to be more, because you have these scholarships, like there's 30 of them in each different club. Like, for example, in here, you'll have 30 kids. 1 or 2 may come train with us and may get a contract. And granted, they may go to another club. But apart from that, I feel like you're almost very lost in terms of what you do after. So definitely more needs to be done. And there needs to be more options and more emphasis to be put on that. Because ultimately, they don't want to do that. They want to be all in on football, do their training the whole time.
Whose job do you think that is? Is that kind of clubs who should have like post-career development kind of channels? Is it the players? Like, it's up to you.
Is it on you? You're someone that's really good at it. You look at it as something you could help influence post-sport and create something that would allow better access to that.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the Players Fund, for example, and 2 of our education charities, we do want to try and help that. And that is, obviously, that's helping athletes at the minute investing, but also we do want to eventually backstrip that to sort of some of the younger ages to give them options. But in terms of who can really help with that, ultimately, you are yourself. So ultimately, you should be the one who's held most accountable. But these kids, I say kids, 16, even from when they're 10 to sort of 18 and they're through the whole scholarship, or they're just signed in with the younger professional teams, and especially parents. Like, for example, I get asked if I want my son to be a footballer, and I always hesitate because I am massively fortunate enough to be in football, but there is a dark side to football that I don't like. Especially with some parents, they can be so pushy, and ultimately they'll take them to 3 or 4 different clubs. They'll be training each every night. And then ultimately they're putting all their eggs in one basket, which I can't advocate for my son or for anyone that I sort of link in with. And the clubs need to do better. I think the leagues need to offer more, because ultimately parents and the players, the kids, are blinded by the more you train, the more chances you've got, which to a certain degree is true. But ultimately, having more options is the way forward. And that's where I think if I didn't have the option of going to uni and not putting all my eggs in one basket when I went to that Fulham and Middlesbrough trial, I probably wouldn't have performed as well as I had. Because every trial is like, oh my God, I've got to do this right. I'm only going to get an hour. He needs to see me kick this ball really well. He needs to see me head. He needs to see me talk. Whereas I literally went into that knowing look, I want to be a footballer, but if it doesn't happen, I'm going on holiday with my mates in a couple of weeks. I'm going to go to uni. I'm going to carry on playing football for the local team anyway. So I feel like as much as they may not want to divide their time onto different things, having options helps you perform better because you don't have the pressure of having to nail that trial all in one go. And I think that's a large reason why I was lucky enough to be offered from Fulham and Middlesbrough in those two trials.
Chris, I want to move into a quick fire round, otherwise we can talk all day. And I'm also blatantly aware that I don't want to get any Jose Mourinho anger at me for being late for a session. So I want to start with one that I always think about. And so quick fire, like I say a short statement, you give me quick and immediate thoughts. What's your pre-match meal?
I tend to have sort of a bolognese, like I'm plant-based now, so I always have spaghetti bolognese. I just have a vegan plant-based version of that. But normally it's, pasta, some orange juice, and keep it quite simple because we eat probably about 3 hours. It's about 3 hours 15 before kickoff. That's generally on all clubs, really.
So if you're a lunchtime kickoff, it's
it tends to be either you decide to have bolognese at 9 o'clock or you just have a normal breakfast.
If you could play one game again that you played in your career, what would it be?
That is a good question. Well done.
That is a good question.
Yeah.
When we went away to Man City and we were 2-0 down and they were about to win the league, and then we came back and won 3-2. I wouldn't want to do the first half again. I'd probably do that different. But being able to score the winning goal, there is no better feeling. I don't care. As a defender, they say you love clean sheets, etc. Scoring a goal is the best feeling. And being able to do that in their stadium was an amazing feeling. Scoring goals is the best.
What's your biggest cheat meal? Big sessions, you're allowed a cheat meal. What's the cheat meal?
It was fish and chips. Obviously, I don't eat fish now, but I would say a burger and chips. I'm a massive chippy. I'll be honest, I am still able to have, I'm not having meat, but there are other versions of plant-based burgers and normal burgers, plant-based burgers, not necessarily something you should have all the time at all. I guess even with desserts like a sponge and custard, I'm a massive custard lover. So I have to look after myself and things, but I don't shy away from having sort of the odd treats.
So no football, you've gone to Zante and you've gone to uni. What would you have done?
Financial economics. So in school, I liked business studies, economics and maths. So that sort of led me into that sort of path. And I'll be honest, I didn't know necessarily what course I wanted to do, but I was just almost following the subjects and I never knew what the end job was. And then funnily enough, my brother did the same course. He's 2.5 years younger than me, so he did the same course as me. Well, as I was going to do.
What keeps you up at night, Chris? What worries you?
I guess I always wonder what my son will want to be when he's older. I think I want him to have the right role models around him and the right influences. And look, that does start with me and my wife, but also in an environment today where social media, and it's so easy for people to just reach out on the touch of a phone or to have influence. I mean, kids are glued to their phone, and ultimately all the comments and all of this world that we're living in that is easily more accessible for people to connect is also a massive worry. And how that world is going, how that side of things does worry me for when my children get to that certain age of linking with people like that.
And final one from me, you played with some unbelievable players. Has anyone stood out as the best?
Yeah, so I get asked this question, and some people are sometimes surprised, even though he is obviously world class. I would say Paul Scholes. And the large part of that is he is someone who he's unbelievable in that I'm playing behind him. I just want to give him the ball and then just watch him ping a ball over there effortlessly. Like, he's also someone that he wasn't sort of in the gym all the time and powering up. He would just rock up sort of to training ground. He'd go on the pitch, just whack his boots on without even a warm up. He's pinging balls all over the place, whereas everyone else is warming up to make sure they don't. He's just ready made for it. And then after, he was just a wizard in terms of being able to find people out of the back of his head. And then obviously he retired, he came back, he still had it. It was, For me, he's a number one.
Do you believe in the kind of natural ability versus hard work? Some players have it, others need to put more into it.
Yeah, I do. I think there is an element of talent, and I do think hard work is a major cause of that. Because even, for example, even when I was younger and I was at Millwall, there's 2 or 3 players that are supposed to be the next Messi. In every academy, there's always the 2 or 3. And then 9 times out of 10, none of them make it. And that's because 1, it either goes to the head, or 2, they don't work hard because they feel like they've got a God-given right. They are going to make it. And I feel like a large part of it is talent, but more of it is hard work. And there are so many, obviously, examples of that in many sports. But I do believe, hard work is a massive thing, because you need to continue to improve, because you might be here ahead of someone who's here, but if they're working, they're catching you. And if you're just relying on your ability alone, you will be caught up.
Final one. You mentioned the dark side of football. In kind of a summary, what do you think that is? And what would you most like to change about the world of football moving forward?
I'm a player now and I'm useful whilst I'm playing. But equally, if it was to start to go downhill, they can be as quick as that in terms of changing their attitudes to how you are around you. And you can be discarded very easily as, shall we say, an asset. And I say dark side in that there are so many, like I touched on with these agents, financial advisors, people reaching out to you. That dream is hanging there for so many people, especially young kids, that you work hard, you can go to all these trials, you can do this. But there is no focus on anything else in terms of outside of football. I want people to follow their dreams, and I want my kid to follow his dream. If he wants to be a footballer, okay, go for it. I'm not going to push him to it, but I will push him on other things as well so that he has options. And I think that's what's massively missing and does need a change.
Chris, we've absolutely loved doing this. Thank you so much for joining us, and we cannot wait to see the portfolio build out with the Players Fund.
No, I appreciate it. And I really enjoyed this chat. I can't believe what the time is. It's been so easy just to talk to you. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.